Tēnā koutou, ko Simon Holdaway tōku ingoa, ko I'm an associate at DVCR, which nobody ever gets right in the university, except my boss, right? Frank Bluefields. And I guess I'm the academic lead for PBRF, and I work really closely with Anne Casey, and we've been on this project, I guess, for more than a year now. And, so we thought we'd just take this opportunity to come and talk to colleagues, really to give you an overview of what PBRF is about, in particular the coming round, and take any questions on pretty much anything to do with this. So I'm going to get this to it. There we go. Okay, so PBRF happens every 6 years, except of course we had COVID. And all of the vice chancellors from all of the universities around the country got together and argued with TEC, the Tertiary Education Commission, to extend it. So this one's actually 8 years instead of the normal 6. So the last time we went through this was back in 2018. And indeed, the period that we're looking at for PBRF for all the research outputs that colleagues are making is between 1st January 2018, as it says in that box there, and the end of December in 25. So it's quite a lot longer period. So why are we so interested in PBRF? Well, it's a big chunk of money that the government gives to universities, really to help fund the research component of universities. So nationally, it's about 315 million a year, and that's divided really on the basis of, I guess, 3 pieces. Partly it's an assessment of all the research that we do, that's the evidence portfolio. There's 2 other components, that is the research degree completions, so masters, PhDs, and external research funding. Those latter 2 we don't have to worry about because we do it in the university for all the colleagues. The evidence portfolio we do have to worry about. And that represents about just over half, 55% of the funding. In total, the University of Auckland gets a little bit under a third of the available funding, so just under 100 million a year. And that comes to the university and is really used for a whole bunch of functions, keeping us in buildings like this, which is a really nice room to be in, and indeed doing research and that sort of thing. So as you see there, our evidence portfolio component is about 48 million a year at the moment, right? And so what's happening is we are assessing ourselves in comparison to all the other researchers in the country in this kind of, in this 2026 evaluation. So that picture, which I hope everybody online can see, really is one that Emmy puts out, and it describes the research funding bundle that's available in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you can see that big purple circle up there on the top left, that's PBRF, which is 315. And I put it up because it just gives us a bit of a comparison to the other sorts of funding. For example, the Marsden funds down there is 79 million, right, which everybody goes on about. So under a third and almost a quarter in comparison to PBRF funding. Some of the other ones, they're the National Science Challenges, which are finishing next year, is about 94 million. So it just gives you a kind of picture of where PBRF sits and some idea why it's still pretty important to the university. Now, you will hear colleagues comment, I think, that the value of PBRF has declined, and that's because that amount, 315, is not increased to keep track with CPI, for instance, right? It's way below. So it is true that the relative value has declined over the years because successive governments, for whatever reason, including, I guess, our new government that got sworn in yesterday, probably is unlikely to increase it, right? However, you know, that said, it's still quite a big block of money. So we need to kind of think about that and put some effort, I guess, into this next round. Now, there are 2 key dates for us as researchers that we need to think about.
Sorry, Simon. Sorry. Just 1 second, if we could just, yeah.
Stay there because I'm.
Please, thank you. And it's just that screen.
And it's just that screen. Okay, cool. You can see on the screen two circled areas, two critical kind of dates. The first one is that now 8-year period, so beginning of 2018 through to the end of 25. That's the time over which our research outputs count, right? For this period, and indeed July 26, so the next year is the date by which we have to have all of the evidence portfolios signed and delivered. In fact, our Vice Chancellor signs off, so I have to assure her that everything we've submitted is accurate, right? And she signs it, so we're fairly interested in getting it right. There's a bunch of other dates there. Those are dates really for Anne and I to worry about. The whole process is audited by an external audit company that TEC employs. So a bunch of things that we've got to worry about. Okay. So there's been a bunch of changes between 2018, the last time we did it, and 2026. And these are in response to Linda Smith's report, which you might have heard about. She chaired a group that looked at PBRF and suggested a number of changes from last time, in particular because both Māori and Pacific knowledge, ways of knowing, were not being accounted for sufficiently in PBRF. And also there was a concern about Māori and Pacific peoples represented in the academy. And there are some levers that are being used in the current PBRF to change both those things, to indeed extend the range of research that's considered in PBRF, and also the value of research that Māori and Pacific colleagues are doing. So they've done this in a number of ways. As it says in the top bullet box there, they've extended the nature of research. So back in 2018, it pretty much was published papers, book chapters as well, right? Books, that sort of thing. But policy documents, community documents were not included. They now are. So there's a range of other forms of output that will be assessed by groups. There are also changes in the weightings, both for the subject panels, Pacific knowledge and Māori knowledge Mataranga Māori panels, but also an ethnicity weighting for people of Pacific and Māori descent. All those factors, we'll talk about those in another slide, are multipliers. So they make quite an impact in the contribution of individual colleagues to the overall score. As you'll notice also, there's some changes in moderation of the panel. So colleagues that form part of the process of evaluation, there's now co-moderators and what they're calling a deputy moderator. You've got to love TEC in their names. So anyway, it's TEC, not us. Both Māori and Pacific. So some pretty significant shifts between 2018 and 2026 in the nature of these things. There's also some shifts in the way that we construct the evidence portfolio. That is the document that we have to prepare to talk about our research outputs. And also some of the, I guess, the allowances that TEC made for people that have particular circumstances. And this is in the achievement relative to opportunity framework, and I'll go through the details of that. So quite a number of both compositional changes to PBRF, but also structural ones in the way that things are delivered. There's also some simplification of areas like new and emerging, although Anne and I are not totally convinced that TEC's definition of making things simple is the way that the rest of us think, but we'll go through some of those. Okay, and did we bring those?
We did.
Okay.
We did.
This one is probably, I guess, one of the more important areas for colleagues to think about because it's the evidence portfolio structure. I've made up a dummy evidence portfolio, which we're handing out to the people here, but we've got it as a PDF, we can put it online as well. What I did is to take the new evidence portfolio structure and pull all my 218 publications they use for PBRF into the new format. So the one thing to remember is all the publications are outside the current period, right? That was deliberate, I closed my old ones, but the structure's the same. And it just gives colleagues, if you're concerned about what the EP looks like, a kind of feel for something in hard copy or indeed soft copy, so you can see what it kind of looks like. Now there's a number of changes and two key components. On that diagram, there's blue areas and grey areas. The grey areas are optional, the blue ones are compulsory. And that's quite a shift. What tech's done is to really push quality over quantity. If you remember, if you did the last one, you would have had 4 NROs, nominated research outputs. Being tech, we've changed all the names and therefore all the acronyms, because clearly that makes it simpler, right? There are now 3 EREs, examples of research excellence. Remember, this is not us, this is tech. We've got to love all the names, right? I guess Anne and I have been out for years. We can reel these things off, which is a bit of a worry in some ways. Okay, other key changes. Instead of 4, you've got 3. Those 3 are now associated with a bunch of what are called activities. And indeed, in the diagram there, you can see that each ERE has 3 supplementary items associated with it, which are either research outputs or extra activities. You can see in the mock one that I've done up, for instance, I wrote a book, I worked in Egypt doing Egyptian archaeology, and we got a Marsden for that work, right? So we can associate with that book a supplementary item, which is the Marsden grant, as well as other, for instance, research outputs or other sorts of activities. I'll go on to about what those are in a minute. That's quite a shift, because before, really what you were lining up with just research outputs. In other words, articles from journals or chapters or books or whatever, right? So the nature of those outputs has changed, but also the way that you kind of construct them. On the right-hand side of the ERE component, you'll see that there are other examples of research excellence, OEREs. You can have 1 to 8 of those. Those existed in a form from before, but this time, they're not only research outputs, they're also other forms of activity. And you can see down the bottom, the CRE components, contributions to the research environment, they have also shifted in what they encompass. Okay, so the structure of this is quite different. The other component that colleagues will see is a lot of narrative. So you get to write descriptions, really narrative stories, I guess, about your research outputs and indeed those contributions. So the structure of the has changed. This slide's also important. What's happened is that they've split what were a whole bunch of research contributions in 218 into the ERE component. So those research activities, you can see there, I've got invitations to present at conferences, outreach engagement, recognition of research outputs, that means citation rates, that sort of thing. Also funding, that means Marsden, HRC, whatever, grants, prizes and uptake and impact. That's separated from contributions to the research environment, many of which you will recognise from before, student development factors, that sort of thing, research development, capability building, research discipline, culture activities. The point really is that a lot of the material that used to be in the contributions has now moved up into that research excellence section. What tech has not done is change the weightings. So the ERE component and everything in it's 70%, contributions is 30%. We tried to get them to shift it from 80% and 20%. They wouldn't listen. So the reason we did that was we felt that contributions, an awful lot of material that used to be in that has moved. But, so many things. Okay, got it. Any questions? Let me know. Is there any questions online? Just because I'm not sure.
Not at the moment.
Okay, if anybody's got anything, please stop me. I'm happy to answer. Anne and I were chatting about presentations like this, and we thought, oh my God, we spent more than a year on this, so we got embedded in our skull. So we can probably reel off anything that you want to know. Okay, the other key thing is the development of the achievement relative to opportunity framework. And there's really three components to this. One is new and emerging colleagues. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. The other is what used to be called extraordinary circumstances, and the third one's part-time. The key difference is that the first and third of those, so the new and emerging and part-time employment, can submit 3 EREs, but they don't have to. They can actually reduce it to 2 and 1. And this is the logic that TEC is running around quality over quantity. If you go for extraordinary circumstances, and I'll explain what those are in a minute, you must reduce the number of EREs from 2 to 1. You don't have choice on that. So the way TEC works this is that for new and emerging colleagues, it relates to the length of the contract. What new and emerging means is that your contract rather with an employer rather than the individual has involved research on January 1st, 2018 or more recently. If you began a position, completed your PhD, for instance, got a position as a lecturer with us sometime in 2018 or more recently, you'll be considered new and emerging. You can then reduce the number of EREs depending on, as it says in that top box, their length of time you've been employed. So if you were employed from 2018 to halfway through the period, through 2021, you can reduce from 3 to 2. If you're in the most recent period, so 22 through to 25, the end of the time, you can reduce it down to 1. However, we managed to argue successfully, Rich, you won something with TEC, that is voluntary. If you want to put in 3, you can. I mean, part of the issue is these are long periods of time now. It's not 6 years anymore, it's 8 years. You know, if people have got positions, new colleagues have got positions with us, they can count their PhD as an output. So that's 1 immediately. It's highly likely that you've got at least 1 other, probably 2 other outputs, right? I mean, there'll be exceptions, I understand, but most often colleagues will have multiple things that they can submit. So that one's voluntary. You can see for part-time employments, the same kind of logic works. Part-time for TEC is 0.8 or below. So between 0.2 and 0.8. If you're employed less than 0.2, you can't submit. If you're between 0.2 to 0.8, you're part-time. If you're over 0.8 up to 1, you're considered full-time. So the break between 2 and 1 EREs, examples of research excellence, is on the FTE. So you're 0.5 to 0.8, you get 2. If you're below 0.5 to 0.2, you get 1. Kind of follows that logic. The same freedom is not available for colleagues that pick a research circumstance. You can see in the white box there, those are the circumstances that colleagues are allowed to select from. TEC was really concerned in the 2018 round, indeed the panels were concerned, that colleagues were writing in a narrative explaining particular issues they have. And some of these are fine, parental leave's easy, right? Other ones, for instance, significant illness, by physical illness, mental illnesses, put the panels into really difficult positions. They were trying to evaluate people's life stories, and that's really what they should not be part of. So TEC decided to remove the responsibility for assessing researchers' circumstances from the panels to the universities, to us in effect. So what we need to do is to ask colleagues to have a discussion with their line managers, so their heads of school, heads of department, and talk about potential issues that have limited their ability to undertake the quantity of research that might be normally expected in 8 years. So look at those criteria. There are some important changes there as well. Long-term illness or disability, extended personal leave, parental leave, for example, is counted in significant family or community responsibilities. So that would enable colleagues to say, well, I haven't had sufficient time to produce the quantity of output, but I do have two, for instance, quality outputs that I want to include. Force majeure, the one at the bottom there, is supposed to take account of COVID-like instances, or indeed earthquakes or floods or other major physical events. The point, as you see in that bottom box, is it's based on time again. Whatever the impact is, it's got to be at least 6 months, but 6 months to 4 years, that's one less ERE. If it's greater than 4 years, it's two less EREs. So that's kind of the logic that they're working with. The key thing to remember is if you go for a researcher circumstance, you have to reduce the number of EREs. The other two, it's voluntary. Up to that, colleagues. Okay. New and emerging colleagues, right? As I said, it's related to the research contract. So the amount of the fact that you have research in your contract from the counting from the first time that you've had an academic position, right? That is included research. Okay, so you have to be enrolled, as it says here, for at least 0.2, right? Up to 1.0. If you're 0.8 or more, it's the same as 1.0. And you have to have been employed between June 12th, 25 and June 11th, 26. So your contract has to have started in that period. And you've got to be employed on the census date, which is the 11th of June, 2026. To be new and emerging, as it says in that second bullet point there, you've got to become an independent researcher. So that means you've got research in your contract on or after the start of the assessment period, so since 2018. So that means basically that you need to, if you're a lecturer, be a lecturer from that time or more recently. So if you got hired today, for instance, as a lecturer, you'd be new and emerging, and colleagues would be from 2018. You have to have research in your role, so it needs to have a research component. So for example, PTFs that do not have a research component cannot be new and emerging researchers, according to the tech rules. And have I got that? The other nuance we want to go over?
Yeah, so yeah, there might be questions on that, but
Which I'm happy to take now, or anything at the end. You more or less ask us anything on PBRF. Okay, these are just a couple of examples, I guess. The first one, staff member A, is really that example that I talked about, a new colleague coming on, being hired by us as a lecturer, more or less straight after their PhD. As long as it's in the window from 218 through to 225, they will be new and emerging. The example B is employed since 1990, but does not have research in their contract, so they cannot be new and emerging. And that's correct. One is the major difference.
they can be PBRF eligible.
But they can be.
Still submit, just not as new and emerging.
Okay. This talks a little bit about cross referrals, but I've added in here also the different panels to which colleagues will submit their evidence portfolios, their EPs. And these largely reflect the area in which you're undertaking research. If you look at the tech guidelines, there's a whole bunch of subject areas under each of these panels. Those are that list of panels in the blue box on the left. I've highlighted the Pacific Research Panel. Submission to that used to be weighted 1, but in the new PBRF, and it's now weighted 2, right? So no, 2.5, excuse me. we ask colleagues to select the panel that best fits their research outputs. There is the opportunity for cross-referral, and that can mean that you're looked at by more than one panel. For instance, just picking the top one there, you could be a biological scientist. You're also, most of your research is in biological science, but it could also be assessed by the Pacific panel. Uniquely for Māori, people applying to the Mataranga Māori and Pacific Research Panel, both the organisation and indeed the co-chairs can suggest cross-referral. That is the only time that both areas can apply for cross-referral. I think the basic kind of rule around this is look at what your research is about and then pick the panel that best fits that, rather than get too concerned about pushing it into one or another area. Okay, how does all this work in terms of the value of the EPs that are submitted for the university? Remember, PBRF is really about taking that $315 million pie and chopping it up into pieces by university or other TO or other providers. So the way this is done is to assess the PBRF EPs, the evidence portfolios, according to a quality score, and you can see in the top there, A's are worth 5, B's are 3, C, new and emerging, so all that definitional thing around new and emerging are 2, C's are 1. If colleagues get an R, then their research is not sufficient to gain a score. That has not changed from 218 to 226. What has changed is the weightings for colleagues putting to the Māori Knowledge and Development Panel and indeed the Pacific Research Panel. You can see those have gone up from 1 to 3 and to 2.5. The other subject panels have not changed. So 2.5, agriculture, architecture, technology, pharmacy, basically the medical science ones. One difference is there's now a public health panel and there wasn't in the previous one. That's just because the medical panels are getting too big. So they kind of split it in half. 2, it relates to chemistry, a couple of arts things, music, visual arts, that sort of thing. 1 is pretty much everything else, including anthropology and archaeology. So that's me. There is, however, a ethnicity-based weighting as well. Māori 2.5, Pacific colleagues and 2. These are multipliers, so they're not additions. So if you're an A, for instance, you have 5. You're in Pacific research, you multiply 5 by 2.5, and indeed you're a Pacifica colleague, you might multiply that again by 2. So the relative value of portfolios changes really significantly. What those mean in dollar terms, we can't say at the moment because it's a proportion of the 315 million. It depends what everybody else does nationally. That's the denominator, the numerator's us. But you can see relatively that the intent of Linda Smith's report has been enacted. I'll put this one in just because it may demystify a little bit how the scoring works. Basically, the portfolio is scored twice. Every portfolio is scored twice. One on the ERE, Evidence Research Excellence component, and one part on the Research Contributions component. So you get a score of 0 to 7 on each one, on the portfolio as a whole, and then those scores are related in that a matrix that looks something like this. This is the one from last time. So if you're going to be an A, you need a 6 or 7 in the Research Excellence component, and you need a 4, 5, 6, 7 in the Research Contributions component. Those numeric scores you can ask for actually from individually from TEC. The university doesn't know what the individual scores are. Some colleagues may talk about high B's and low A's. This is how it works. So for instance, if you look at the 580 in the 7 column for ERE and the 3 for contributions to the research environment, that would be a high B. If you move down one, you score a little bit higher in the contributions area. At 610, that would be a low A. That's kind of how it works. But as I said, you have to actually write to tech to get these results. That's kind of how the scoring operates. Okay, one final point. In previous times, around now or a little bit later, we'd be spinning up mock panels. That is groups of colleagues from inside the university who would assess our evidence portfolios. What we found is that by and large, those panels were really hard on colleagues. We found that people that were would be an A in the national assessment were being given Bs or even kind of high Cs, right? We were just really hard on each other. In fact, I had one colleague from a faculty I won't name saying, "That's a really good idea. We should really kind of push our colleagues." And I went, "Yeah, okay, that's not one that I'd actually back." So we had a fantastic colleague from Pamela Moss's office, Holdaway, who's very good at computation, and she developed an AI that lets us actually model what our scores will be, and we have got rid of the panels. What we did is to look at the performance in 218 and match that against publicly available assessments and publications that we get through Scopus. And we developed a series of different models for different subject areas, and we can reasonably well predict what the output will be. And it's a bit less subjective than let's be really hard on our colleagues' approach. So that's what we've done. And it's an indication only. It doesn't work for all colleagues around the university. If you don't publish a whole lot in Scopus, we can't get a result, and that's fine. We just talk to the academic heads about how colleagues are going. They think colleagues are going.
Can I ask, that was the modeling that had come through like maybe 2 months ago or something like that, right? To the academic heads, but that modeling wasn't based on the new Pacific PBRF structure.
Okay, so what it's based on, all it models is the quality score. So that's certainly all it models, and it won't take account of different forms of research outputs. You're absolutely right, and that's fine. We know it's got limits, right? And it's not intended to be the final answer. What was intended to do was to try and reduce the cost and actually get something that's a bit more objective. There are certainly areas in the university where it just doesn't work. That's fine. We kind of know where those are, and we can do workarounds. And the intent really of this is just to give us an idea where we're sitting, and to look at colleagues that are either doing exceptionally well, we can go, yeah, that's great, or ones that might need support. And I think we just need to be a little bit gentle about what it all means and not get too wound up about this. Otherwise, as I said, the notion that somehow you scare colleagues into doing better research, it's like, yeah, I was ahead for an awful long time with the comments, I tell you, and it's like, I never found that work terribly well, so yeah. So it's got holes, absolutely. And of course, what it doesn't do is to calculate the final multipliers, because they are in effectively add-ons. So which panel you go to, for instance, if you're going to Pacific Research, it doesn't need to use the multipliers of 2.5 or indeed the ethnicity one by another 2. That's not the point. They're multipliers that are added on top of the, in a sense, of the quality output. Quality score output. Yeah, that's just the different models that we did. So we did one, model 2, for instance, already covered the arts sort of broadly. Statistics we had to make on them. So the way they publish is particular, right? On its own. So thanks so much for listening. We'll be happy to Answer any questions? See if there are any online that want to have it. Yeah.
I asked what if there isn't one up there yet. I was a little bit confused about the example where it was a fractional appointment that was primarily teaching. So I'm trying to figure out, like, for the PTFs who are also doing research, but that's not really their core contract, whether they're PBRF eligible or not.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. The university needs to make a decision on, and it hasn't yet. In terms of tech, to be new and emerging, because it's a new and emerging researcher, you must have research in your contract. And the way they've defined it for 226 is it relates to the contract, not the person. So in other words, quite commonly, colleagues coming out of a new PhD, for instance, may getting a teaching only position, but indeed be doing research. But because it's not part of their contract, it doesn't count towards a new and emerging researcher status. So that's the way tech's decided to run this. In terms of the university, we have to decide as a collective what we do with PTF colleagues, right? Whether indeed, and there are a number of options. Do we turn them into lecturers, for instance, right? Because we can see the potential value of colleagues in terms of PBRF. That said, PBRF is one piece of a much bigger decision matrix about the future of colleagues, and indeed colleagues, what they want to do. Do they really want to become research active? Yeah.
Question? There hasn't been any questions in the chat as well. We've had 11 tune in, which is awesome. And we've had a few questions about if we can just get a copy of your presentation as well. This session has also been recorded, so we'll disseminate this to those who were interested. Thank you so much for coming in today, Simon. We really appreciate your time. And if we have no further questions, we have catering outside, some lunch. If you need to shoot off, then please take a plate with you and be on your way. But once again, thank you, Simon. And sorry, what was your name? And thank you so much, Anne.
Oh, great pleasure. It's really fun to come out from the clock tower. And Anne and I are really happy to both obviously provide copies of the presentation, also the mock-up EP if people are interested in that. And if you've got any questions, just shoot me an email. I'm really happy to answer one-on-one too. So
This is super useful, by the way.
Yeah.
I've been really struggling with how to visualize it,
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
is excellent. Yeah.
That's what I did it for, because it's like, just remember, as I keep saying, all the publications are out of date, right? Because they're my old ones that I've used from 2018.
Yeah.
So you would have to use publications and activities from 2018 through 25, right? That's the only difference. And obviously I haven't actually done everything yet. Because I haven't got to the end of 25, so that's why I didn't use the current ones. You'll get there.
Is this is all set now for the next round, or is it changeable given what's happening in our political landscape?
That's a really good question. To which I'm going to hedge. Probably it's said, right? So they've just gone through a report, Linda Smith's one that I keep going on about from last time. They've also had what they call a sector reference group, right? Yvonne, you're on it, right? Yeah. We've gone through all that process, and we've had submissions, and we've all of the universities have given their contributions back, and tech's made decisions. So my kind of gut feeling is it'll probably not change. Partly maybe because the process is so far down the line and it won't be high on the agenda for the new government, right? Which is another reason, right? But I mean, all that said, I can't guarantee they wouldn't change it, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah, but that is a lot of crystal ball gazing.
Yeah.
Which actually colleagues of Anna and mine, we've been doing quite a lot of since the government changed. I wonder what that means, you know. Yeah, probably if we want to change it again, my guess is it would be in the next one after 26. But
I would just add in addition to that, at the moment, we're still working to a bunch of draft guidelines and content, and we're waiting on the finalised PBRF guidelines, which is supposed to be due the end of the year, but I'm thinking, Yvonne, they might be later.
Really trying to get it out before the end of the year.
Okay,
We're in the last phases of kind of tidying them up and.
yeah, it's a lot of work. So, if we're to receive them by the end of the year, then we would look internally to how we can create some kind of simplified guidelines to help people kind of understand the nuances, I guess, around PBRF, and they'd be released maybe early next year, first quarter next year, rather than expecting people to wade through the full set of guidelines. People are more than welcome to wade through the set of guidelines, but we are looking to provide a FAQ simplified well, and we're always answer questions.
and I guess, you know, as I said, they're not finally adding on, but hopefully this year. It's why we haven't done one yet, because we really don't want to provide colleagues with a whole lot of guidelines that we then
Yeah.
change or rewrite.
If you have a resident expert in Yvonne, but I don't know.
Awesome, thank you so much. Help yourself outside. Joanna? No.
I believe I'm emerging. The bonus would be. Hi, Mona.